Welcome to the Kolbecast, episode 135. Merry Christmas. Today, Jordan returns to the show as we discuss writing and remembering, some of the saints who are our friends, and the changing of times from the ancient world to the new apostolic age. Grab a cup of coffee, tea, cider, hot cocoa, or whatever, and join us in this week of Christmas. We hope that you enjoy the show.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, liturgical musician, popcorn and podcast fanatic, and Kolbe homeschooling mom to 4 lads and lasses of middle and high school age.
And this is Stephen, homeschooling father of 5 and director of development for Kolbe Academy.
And I'm Jordan. As a product of homeschooling, I'm proud to teach Greek and Latin for Kolbe online and serve as the alumni and public relations director.
Okay, we are recording on a Monday morning. Good morning, Stephen. How's it going so far?
Going pretty well. Actually, it's going really well. So we were just talking before as we're getting started up about coffee, but this was a confession weekend in our family. And so that's always nice. But, sometimes you just go in and it's kind of like the laundry list of, these are the same sins I'm always committing. And it's nice. But this weekend, our priest had just really great advice. He was saying, well, why are you committing these sins? You need to reflect on that because sin takes some form of it's filling some sort of good, some sort of need. So think about what's missing in your life. And I thought that was really good advice. So it was an exceptionally good weekend for a confession weekend, I thought.
Mm-hmm. That's like a bonus, yeah.
Yeah.
That makes me think of an episode of, was it the Shea podcast with Father Blake Britton and Brandon Vaught? They were talking about similar things along those lines about confession, and maybe I'm thinking of the wrong episode here, so I may have credited incorrectly. But thinking about why are you committing that? Where's that coming from? So that ties into several conversations we've had around here. And we have Jordan with us this morning. Good morning, Jordan.
Good morning. How are you guys?
Doing well. I have a funny story for you, Jordan. So 2 of my kids are in one of Jordan's Latin classes. And so the other day, one of them was asking for some assistance on something. And so I queued up the recording from earlier in the week to kind of get up to speed with what was going on. And I see on the display is a prayer in Latin to start the class, as you always do. And then when I pressed play, I heard my own voice. And I was like, hold on. And I thought I had like some audio file playing in a different app or something. And I was really, really thrown for a loop. Like, what is happening? But then it turns out you are playing a clip of a podcast for them. And it just took me minutes to figure that out. And I just got a good laugh out of that.
Yeah, I never remember what I do in my classes. I have no memory of that. We sometimes I'll try to, that something funny happens, so I'll be showing my wife, and I'm like, oh, I did that also. I have no memory of that.
Well, they enjoy it so much, and they just laugh the whole way through. This one, the episode you were previewing for them was the Msgr Shea episode, number 123.
Oh yeah.
But that was just a funny moment for me, thinking, hold on, what all do I have open here, and why am I hearing myself?
So I guess I was playing that clip to start the class, like everybody here, like 15 seconds or something of it.
Right. Yes, that was funny. Well, we are freestyling this morning. You know how I am about outlines, so we'll see what happens here. But we all have our coffee here, including me. I've not yet finished with mine, so Jordan has his pot of coffee, which bodes well for us, I think. And
yes, I wish I could share it, but we're limited.
I think I'm going to have to interrupt some of my children running past as we go along here for another cup as we're starting this Monday morning. Now, Jordan, I think my wife is trying to give you a run for your money on Latin class popularity. I heard her conducting a class with her, I think it's Latin 3, and they were doing a penguin murder mystery in Latin.
Whoa. Well, she's way ahead of me if she's doing that stuff. So
clever.
Yeah, I think it started with a penguin badge that she randomly was giving to people just to make them wonder why they earned a badge and what the penguin was for. And
yeah.
it morphed into a murder mystery where they had to read their backgrounds in Latin and try to figure out who killed the penguin. And
Wow, I bet they love that. They love badges. And so for any listeners that don't know what we're meaning by badges, if you're not in Kolbe, the learning platform that we use is called Schoology. And within that, it looks a little bit like Facebook, but students have their profile and they can earn badges from teachers in classes. And I'm telling you, students will do almost anything for a badge. So
Yeah, true.
if it's a good one, I make custom badges, but I try to limit them where they're very hard to get. And it's usually for favors for me, like listen to this podcast, for example. I might give them a badge for that, but they'll do anything for badges. That's a great idea of her.
Yeah, that was very clever. Well, we're just kind of catching up here. Jordan, since we last recorded, you've had a couple of articles come out in Prime Matters that you were telling us about in episode 116, things I would tell my students. So what kind of feedback are you getting from that?
It's been really great. I'm surprised at the number of people who've reached out to me. People I know, but typically I wouldn't converse with, but they saw the article somewhere and wanted to um, offer their thoughts about it or encouragement to go farther, those kind of things. But what has been really great is Prime Matters reached out and they really liked the first article that I wrote, The Hidden Origins of Victim Culture. And they offered to publish the series. So I was doing this little series we had talked about in a previous episode of things I would tell my students under the guise of that I'm not able to teach. I'm always teaching languages. I'm not a classicist. I didn't get my degree in classics. I learned the languages to do further research for what my field is, which is New Testament and early Christian studies. But it's developed into this really cool thing where I'm able to, like a spy, go back into the pagan world and sort of see the differences between that world and what came immediately after it. And so showing the distinctions between the world before Christ and the world after Christ is one of the most exciting things for me to do. And this series of articles fits in, I think, well with the initiatives of Prime Matters. That's probably why they liked it. I mean, it just kind of fits. But as a writer, it's amazing to get a real destination for your work. Because I don't want to write blog posts. I don't want to just send things to my friends. I want a place to publish. And so I'm very grateful for the opportunity. And then I'm just adding the pressure to get these articles done. It's hard to do when you're doing something that probably you don't have anything to model after in a way. So it does feel like I'm doing something new, which is hard to do. And so I found myself for the second article, it was the hardest article I've ever written that's only 3 pages long, but it took like 20 drafts and I have no recollection of how many hours I actually spent working on it. But that one, I hope people will like it. It's called The Enemy Next Door. You can find it on Prime Matters. And it basically, in that one, I'm just showing how in the pagan world, there were 2 words in Latin for enemy. And so there's enemies that can be dehumanized who are not part of your society. And then there's enemies who are within your society, which are rivals. And it just kept growing really big, the article did, because the word for the enemy who is the one that can be dehumanized is hostis. And it's obviously Catholics can easily connect that because it is etymologically connected to hostia, which is the Eucharistic host. And so I was weaving that into the article, but it didn't really work. So that's going to be another article. I had to do a really basic, who is my enemy and what kind of enemy are they?
I think those topics, I mean, it's so much fun when we get to talk about this, Jordan, as we're smoking pipes every week, which is a great, even though we're in different states, we can still do that. Still do that
The
together.
best hour of the week.
Yes, yeah. But it's become apparent to me just over as I've been looking at Kolbe's curriculum and kind of delving in that is really a fundamental. It's one of the key components about what we do here in Kolbe in the high school years, in particular, going through and looking at what was life like before the incarnation, what was virtue, looking at some of those great works. I mean, you look at the Iliad and the Odyssey; those are basically the two fundamental works for what is virtue in the military and in the more home life. In the Odyssey, you get, and how that's different in, and then of course you get into the area of Christendom in 11th grade year and more modern stuff in the 12th grade year. But that is a fundamental, and I don't think we emphasize that enough. But as Monsignor Shea, the book they put out there at the University of Mary, and talking about how we're exiting the era of Christendom and entering an apostolic age, it's so important for us to understand that change from the world before Christ, before the incarnation, and how dramatically different the world is after the incarnation. And then I love this about your article, showing about how exiting this era of Christendom, there's this almost a perversion then, or this weird sort of, it's now taken for granted, but there's kind of a perversion of those Christian virtues and what we, and it seems vital actually that we start to really focus on that and understand that today.
Yeah, and I think that's why it needs to be more basic than so I have to pare my articles down a lot, because I think we have to ask some fundamental questions. And the fundamental question for this second article is, who is my enemy? And it's sort of a mock, it's like a perversion or a mock question of the scribe, the Mosaic scribe, who asked Jesus, who is my neighbor? And that is really profound. I don't think that question, who is my neighbor, could have arisen in any other culture than the Jews at the time of Christ, because they had heard Abraham will be the father of many nations. And the prophets had been speaking about this sort of worldwide acceptance and drawing people into God's kingdom, but it hadn't happened yet. I mean, everybody was segregated into these. Each tribe was, even if the tribe was as big as an empire, was exclusive to itself. It was its own species almost. They didn't even look at people outside of that tribe as human, really. And I think that's why when people will describe exile as worse than death, because in exile you're existing in no man's land. You're nothing. You're a non-human. You don't belong to any group. So what I say quickly, and maybe this will help explain it if somebody reads the article as well. There was a sentence, and I wanted to make a lot more about this, but I'm going to have to do it at another time. But that who is my neighbor is the first question of Christendom. It's sort of, because Jesus himself says there, or maybe you could say it's the last question of the pagan world, might be a better way to say it. But Jesus answers in one gospel with the parable of the Good Samaritan, which makes a hero out of an enemy to the Jews, which is really interesting. In another gospel, in the same encounter, when they're asking what is the greatest commandment, it's the same episode, but they record it in just a slightly different way. They say to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And in this encounter, the scribe praises Jesus for knowing this and reflects it. He says it again, and he said, all of these, to love your neighbor as yourself, is greater than burnt offerings or sacrifices. And Jesus says, you are not far from the kingdom. And I think that's profound, that he's saying that you recognize that sacrificing and burnt offerings of the pagan world are worth not as much as loving your neighbor as yourself. That is saying you're close. You are close. That's the way that Jesus answers him. So I think that this is telling us of what comes, which is Christendom, when they're commissioned to go into all the world to preach the gospel to every creature. When St. Paul is saying there is no longer Jew nor Greek, nor slave nor free, all of that. I think that it's saying this message is for everyone. And for the first time, we lose that 2,000 years later with missionary endeavors, and the whole world basically has heard by now. There are no peoples existing out there who have never heard. Who knows what they've heard about it, but at that time they had never heard it. So part of the gospel and the good news was this, that there aren't these tribes. There aren't these tribes that were established on a sacrifice. And that's what plays into the hostia, the sacrifice offered for the whole world that sort of equalizes everyone. But another direction I want to go eventually, and I tried to in this article, but it just made it too big, was during the Albigensian heresy in the Middle Ages. They had to ask themselves then, they should have asked themselves, who is my enemy? Because what happened was they went to Albi in France and said, there's a heresy happening here. Kill everybody, kill them all. We can't sort this out. Kill them all and let God sort it out, is what they said. So they had to ask, who is my enemy? A reversal, because everybody looked the same. Everybody basically acted the same, and the division was doctrinal. And that's totally different than the pagan world with its false peace that it had offered. And so I think when they started asking, who is my enemy, that sort of ended, it weakened Christendom as a state, as a functionary that carry out prosecution and things like that. It sort of ended it. Now the church doesn't have that power. It doesn't have that same power to do that. We have our nation states and all of that. So we're in more of a confusion, I think, than ever with who is my enemy next door. What do they believe? I mean, and why do I sympathize with somebody on the other side of the world and I feel a connection to them through the internet? I don't even know the name of the guy that lives right next door to me.
So many directions you can go from there. It's so great.
Since we first heard about this article in development, Jordan, I've been thinking about the hostia and the host, and that has really stuck with me thinking about it. So I'm glad to see it coming along as it has, and there's more yet to come. I remember as you've been working on these, you were mentioning, and as you said earlier, your multiple drafts of this. I think that is really interesting to hear, especially for students who are working on their own compositions, like the process that you have gone through. Will you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I think that is if you're doing something worthwhile, if you believe that it's worthwhile, you have to know when to stop and when not to stop. And that's the hardest part. I think in undergrad or high school, a lot of the problem is you're trying to write what the teacher wants to hear, first of all, which is necessary. I mean, you're trying to show that you've assimilated the material and you can articulate it back to them. But I think when it's for an assignment, students automatically think it's not worth as much as it would be if they were writing without the chains of being chained to a class for this thing. But I would encourage students to save those things and to take it more seriously, in that it might be valuable. It could be valuable. You might develop it more when you get to college or even afterwards. I mean, we're so segmented in that we have these kind of artificial stages that we've set up that students move through. And here you're in fourth grade, this is what you learn, then fifth and sixth. And the same thing happens in college and even in high school, where you think, you think there is a destination for what I'm writing, but it's just the teacher who's going to read it. I would say save it and dig as deep as you can with it. Not everyone will want to do that, because not everyone's aspiring to be a writer or intellectual, but there's plenty at Kolbe that are. And I think that you can do a lot more than you think you can do. And you could develop these kind of ideas that you're getting from your classes and just staying with it. There is a time to call it done. And everything is imperfect. I mean, when you're done, it's always you read it again, and you're like, I would have said it this way or that way. So that's the other thing you have to get over when it's not with a deadline for a class, but if you think that there's something valuable in it, that you work it out until it's done, and don't accept it's pretty good. I think so. I've talked to you, Bonnie, about like leaving meat on the bone, in my own writing. And I think you got to get to the point where you feel like you've done pretty well. You're looking at the chicken wing and it's pretty much clear of all the chicken. And then you're like, okay, this one's done. You don't have to eat the bone itself, but get it as good as you can and then call it done. And it will open up tons of new things for you when you take it serious in that way. And then as far as the process of doing it, you have to put in time. And I don't count the time that I'm writing. I don't even think I wrote for an hour today or 2 hours, whatever it is. I have done that in the past when I was more like the students. Well, during my dissertation, I would wake up early and I'd write for a set amount of hours. And I just had to do that to get enough on the page to turn it into something big. But now I don't really do that. It's more about I think the quality rather than the quantity of what I'm doing. I'm just trying to articulate ideas that I can basically see in my head, but they're so hard to get them out on the page. And in the front, the guy that wrote the foreword for my When the Earth Was Flat book said that the writing is effortless, but it's not effortless. Maybe it reads that way, maybe, but it's not at all. It's not at all. It's very hard.
You're talking about this, it was making me think of actually going back after my wife and I were just married. We're getting my stuff from my old childhood home, and we found this stack of my papers throughout, from like 6th grade through high school. And we were just for fun sitting down and reading some of those. And that was just kind of interesting, both to think, to kind of get that glimpse back. What was I thinking and what was I focusing on? And it was actually kind of interesting as well to see kind of, because that encompassed kind of a developmental stage where, by the time I was a senior, I was making good, solid arguments, but my 7th and 8th grade papers, not so much, more just like a summary sort of thing. But it also makes me think about how much, I mean, this might be because I've had multiple football concussions, but how much I forget about things. So, when I'm in something, especially when I'm focused enough to be writing about it, like my senior thesis when I was at TAC, when I go back and I read those and I think, wow, I actually have a hard time understanding what I was saying back then because I've forgotten so much. But I think that just, I mean, I don't keep a journal and I should, but what you're saying makes me think that could be so valuable, just to be writing down some of these things, like this is what I'm thinking about now. And even though it seems obvious, I'm going to forget about these deeper thoughts within a year. And if I could go back and just kind of page through and think, oh yeah, that was good. I was onto something there. That would be valuable just as in spiritual life for development or whatever, in addition to, well, both, I guess, developing that habit of writing, but also then trying to make it good. And like you're saying, when you actually have to produce for somebody else, then
yeah. I was going to ask you about that when you go back, because sometimes you go back and you're surprised by your own self, like that, by your young self. You're like, how did I know all that then? But now I'm learning from myself, 20 years on or whatever. And I think part of that is because, yes, it's a sin, I think, to assert yourself too early and to say, like, I'm the one who knows, I have the answers and all of that. But it's equally a sin to say, I don't have anything to offer and I shouldn't be doing it. That's something that I've been discerning, I guess, lately, is trying to find where I sort of fit in, do I have something to say? Because it's easy to say, to denigrate yourself and just kind of say, I don't have anything to offer, but that's not true. That'd be like saying you don't want to meet anyone new. You don't want anyone to know anything about you. And there are, interestingly enough, I'm reading this book about a local hermit here in New Hampshire who died in the 1960s. Very interesting, amazingly interesting story. And he would journal, and that's how they knew about him. From the time he was 15, he would just recount little things like what the weather was that day, how many eggs his chickens had laid, and who was visiting. So this actually opened up like a sort of something that you wouldn't normally think about. So as a boy, he was living out in this remote farm near Keene, New Hampshire, and he would record every visitor that came or everyone that they went to. And the neighbors were constantly, they'd travel a couple miles, but they'd see each other. So they might have, like this one day, he had 10 different neighbors stopped in at different times. He and his siblings were sent to different neighbors, and it was to borrow this or that, or to bring, we have extra butter, here's some butter. And the author smartly was saying that is something that is kind of hidden. We don't assume that they were without automobiles traveling to each other's houses constantly, but she was saying his journals make that clear, that was a big part of life for rural people then, was to visit neighbors and things. So why is he recording this as like a 15-year-old? Who knows? But that's how this book came about now, and we know something more about life as it was for him by him doing this.
I think sometimes we're just given things, or we're given a state of mind to share it with somebody else. So I think here's another reason to possibly record things, because sometimes I think there is just something where it's not super important to you, but the Holy Spirit has given it to you to give to somebody else, and for them, it can be what they need to hear right now. And I remember sitting around a table, and it was like, Steve, you gave us the best advice. You gave me the best advice when I was heading off to college, and I'm so thankful for that. And it was like, and what did I say? They had to tell me. It was like, oh, I think I guess I remember saying that, but it was gone for me. It was not something like, this is what I tell every college student or whatever. But yeah, so I think there's another valuable reason, I think, just to be putting some of that down, and then maybe occasionally reflecting back on the year or the years that are there in the past too.
It shows that you lived. And if for whatever reason people want to dig into who was Stephen Hayden, here's his journal, here's, that it shows that nobody knows while us regular people don't know while we're living how it's all going to turn out, or anything. It's making me think of Reinisch, who we've talked about before, Franz Reinisch. So for the listeners who may not know, it's a particular going to future saint, a martyr. He was killed by the Nazis during World War II. He was a priest, and he was the only priest out of 17,000 Catholic priests that were conscripted into Hitler's army to serve as chaplains or whatever, or sometimes as soldiers, as he was. He was the only one to refuse signing the oath of allegiance out of 17,000, and he was killed to make a testimony out of him that you don't dare stand up to Hitler. And so I'm translating a book that's written by this Father Kreutzberg is his name, and Kreutzberg, Heinrich Kreutzberg. If you don't mind, I'll just read this little part of what he wrote in his foreword, which I think it shows what he's doing and why it's important. But he says, the dead are binding upon us with reverence and gratitude. And this is the man who wrote the book about Reinisch. With reverence and gratitude, we should remember those who sacrificed blood in their very lives during the years of Nazi persecution, whether in prison or concentration camps. Among the victims of this period was the priest Franz Reinisch, who was beheaded in Brandenburg on August 21st, 1942. I came to know him while he was in the Berlin Wehrmacht prison, and in accordance with the custom of the early Christian times, I collected all available material about him from the very first day. The Nazi government attempted to create criminals rather than martyrs, and for that reason, the examination of some fatalities proves to be very difficult, but here a careful assessment is even more important so that the evidence is not lost. The case of Reinisch is likely one of the most valuable of all Christian prison literature and should be included in the series of Great Confessions from Prison Cells. and then he goes on and on. But I think it's amazing that this priest knew, and he said from day one when he met him, it was the last 6 weeks of Reinish's life, and he visited him every day and recorded his whole story. Had Reinish himself write a lot of things that he handed over to him at the end. And Reinish himself had kept journals and things, so that all of that was collected. And you would not have, and in translating this, his childhood, his teenage years, his college years, he was wild. You would never think he was going to be what he became, and you would have never thought that. In fact, when he went to he had become a priest, he tried to leave. He joined the Palatines, and he was in Bamberg, Germany, in their novitiate, and he couldn't take it. There were too many rules. Smoking was one of them. They made him hand over all his cigarettes, and he battled for 3 weeks saying, I can't take this anymore. And then he tried to escape. He tried to climb over the wall because he was ashamed that he was ashamed of himself, that he was too weak. He was too weak, and he didn't want to say goodbye. So he tried to sneak out at night. And as he passed, they had a Lord's grotto there, and he heard a voice saying, stay, stay. And he ended up staying, and it changed everything for him. So from a man who was too weak to go through, I mean, he couldn't, whatever his comforts, his cigarettes, his whatever, he couldn't handle being uncomfortable for that time, to go from that to being able to be beheaded when everyone else is telling him, you don't have to do this. You don't have to do this. You can sign the oath of allegiance. In fact, that's what Father Kreutzberg wanted to make sure when he met Reinish, was that he was sane and doing this for the right reason, because he did not have to do it. And if anyone out there has seen the movie A Hidden Life, which is on Amazon, it's about Franz Jägerstätter. It's a very good movie. Jägerstätter did the same thing, but he was a married man with children, and he knew of Reinish. He was beheaded in the same prison. Everything's the same. Reinish going to his death in this way inspired Jägerstätter to go through with it himself and do the same thing. And he's canonized. Jägerstätter's like, he's more known. Reinish is still not that well known in the English-speaking world, although he's big in Germany and Austria. And that's what I want to do, is make him known.
Such an amazing story. And you've been to where his remains are now, right? You've had your own experience with him.
Yeah, that's what started it all. So I've said elsewhere that I always feel jealous of my cradle Catholic students, because they always seem to have these saints that they are latched onto, and obscure saints that I've never heard of. And I don't know why. I think it's beautiful, though. They have like some obscure modern saint somewhere in like Poland or somewhere, and I'm surprised. I'm like, how did you ever even learn about this person? Why are you drawn to them? And a lot of times they can't explain it. It's just like they know the person, or more than that, they're known by the person. And that's what happened to me as we were visiting the Schönstatt shrine in Fallender, Germany. And right outside of the chapel, it's a beautiful little chapel. You can Google it, Schönstatt. They have like 3 or 4 graves sitting there. And as we were walking up to visit this, his just stood out to me. And the only way I can describe it is it's as if he like nodded or waved as I was walking up. There was a little candle burning in front of his name, and it just stuck with me. It's from that time on, I've tried to gather what I can, learn what I can about him, and I feel an attachment that I think is probably what I see in my students with their saints. I think it is. Mine had always been biblical figures, Saint John, or different people, because I grew up, reading the Bible a lot as a Protestant pastor's son, and I wasn't as familiar with all the other ones. But this one, Franz, has like really become important in my life, my everyday work, and I think that's the relationship that others have.
Being a convert, I think I'm similar, Jordan, where I I have a fondness for when I hear stories about saints, but when I with the cradle Catholics, I mean, I've heard stories of people saying, "Yeah, I had a dream or I had a vision of this person telling me this thing," and then not even like saying this wasn't like a normal dream or whatever, and you know, you start looking and it's like, oh, this is this blessed person that, I mean, there's actual, and to my Protestant mind still back there, I think, well, that's crazy stuff. That doesn't happen. It's like, well, of course that happens because these saints are in heaven and are praying for us and are loving us and establishing things, trying to help us get to heaven. Of course this happens, but it's just me thinking, no, that's just like fairy tale stuff as well. But I think some of these nice cradle Catholics, which um, don't have that sort of resistance necessarily to that. But
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I wanted that. I wanted what I saw with them, but I guess you don't understand. Like I thought that my devotion to Saint John or to somebody, Saint John the Evangelist, or I thought that was the same sort of thing, but the encounter was real, and it showed me another level of things. And I mean, it just keeps coming back, and I don't know how to, I don't know exactly how to articulate the way that it's present always now in my life, but I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful, and I feel compelled to I guess help in a way. So I feel grateful also that I have this opportunity to do a translation of a key work. There's a lot more out there to be done, and people, you can find some. There's one good article that summarizes everything online somewhere. I forget exactly where. There's a Wikipedia page about Rhinish also, but there's not a lot beyond that. I guess somebody wrote a book recently, but it's somebody from Ireland, and it's based on the story of Rhinish, and apparently it goes all over the place. He was writing it to try to get it piggybacking off of A Hidden Life. So he wrote it like a movie script, and filled in like all these details that just aren't there and stuff to make it really dramatic and acceptable as a movie script. But I think this translating an original work by somebody that knew him is really one of the key things that needs to be done to help bring awareness in the US. My wife was recently in Austria, and amazingly, she met a man whose father knew Rhinish. He had met him, he knew him, and he was amazed. He wanted to know what book is being translated, all of this stuff. So I hope, it's one of my goals to get this translated and available by next year. So if anyone's listening, you should look for it. The title is Franz Rhinish, A Martyr of Our Time, and maybe it'll be changed in the English when we put it in English. But if that's the exact translation of the work now, and if anyone can read German, you can find it online as a PDF.
So did you get hooked up with that project when you were there at the time?
No, this came recently. Actually, in this summer, writing articles. So I have several books about him and stuff, but writing articles this summer, what are becoming the Prime Matters series. I tried to write one. It was the like 80th or whatever. It was the anniversary of his death, of his martyrdom, and I was trying to contrast him with I think it was Kelly Grant, some Hollywood like golden era thing who had a movie come out on the same day that Rhinish was martyred. And I was trying to show this contrast of lives. Like over here in America, here's the richest Hollywood star, his movie's coming out. And that's what I started doing. I was trying to get that ready for the occasion of his martyrdom. But while I was doing it, I kept reading this book that I'm translating now to get more details, and I just said, much more important than this article is to put my efforts towards making others be able to just read it for themselves. And that's what so that switched it for me late summer this year.
Okay.
Really interesting as you're saying this, how things are hidden. In this case, obviously Hitler was, and the Nazis were trying to hide this, make it a crime rather than a martyr. But that that well, that that he spoke to you and you formed this friendship with him, even though he was dead for 60, 70 years or whatever. But now God is taking this opportunity to share this life, this saint with, we'll have an opportunity, all of us will have an opportunity to meet him now and see what his life was like, which, what has been hidden for so long. And even as you started this out, we started talking about journaling and how important it is and how that you can kind of reveal what your life was like. Of course, it brought me back to Saint the Little Flower as well, and how she was completely unknown. I mean, if her superiors hadn't told her to write, we might never have known about her. People at the time were like, "Oh, what did she do?" But now, as a doctor of the church, in Providence, there has to be um, this calling out to somebody else to, it's like, God created and brought forth this beautiful person, but it may be up to other people, and likely, of course, with humility, it almost has to be somebody else who shows that beauty, reveals that beauty to everybody else. I mean, we've got Mother Teresa and John Paul II, who were out there in front of people, so we knew the great things they were doing and we could see their holiness. But for the most part, the holy, beautiful saints that we have are tucked away in those little, they're stuck in a prison, or they're doing the little things in a convent, or they're serving their family, being a beautiful mother and a grandmother. So yes, they touch people's lives and they do those things, but oftentimes just how beautiful they are isn't known to everybody else. So that's,
Yeah, it's interesting you say that hidden. That's the about the other martyr, Franz Jägerstätter, a hidden life. Like, why did they even title the movie that? Because I think what this Father Kreutzberg is pointing out, that we have to make these stories known as that they were victims, not criminals. And there's one of the things that got Reinisch in trouble, a lot of it, but I mean, he felt lonely. He felt he was alone. He never imposed. This is what I love, is he never said, all you priests, you should be doing what I'm doing. Everyone out there, if you're a true Catholic, don't sign. It was all personal. And it reminds me in a small way of when I converted. I had to stop asking, do you have to be a Catholic to be saved? And only ask, do I need to be a Catholic to be saved? Only that, and let God handle the rest, because I don't know. I don't know. Oh, I know for me. And that's what his decision of conscience, in making that, he said, I, as a Christian and an Austrian, can never take the oath of allegiance to a man like Hitler. And this shows the loneliness here. There must be people who are protesting against this abuse of authority, and I feel called to this protest. He didn't know that there were others out there. The entire crowd, everybody, the entire crowd was, he didn't know if there were others there, but he said there must be people called to it. And he had everything. He could have been a lawyer. He was, all the girls liked him in college. He was a popular guy. He was outgoing. He was funny. He was all these things. And yet he became this kind of a true leader, which tells the story of a martyr of our time. I mean, it's amazing. I can't wait to finish the translation and let people read it. I want people to know him. It'll be like introducing, you introduce a family member or something that you've always wanted your new group to meet, and you're proud of them or whatever. That's how it sort of feels, that it's up to me to do that for him.
I'm looking forward to that.
Again, the feeling of loneliness is, or being alone in that. And so it's reflecting back, because as I start out talking about in my thoughts or my words of my priest here, who talking about sin is trying to fill those lacks, but the fact that he didn't go toward sin and what would have been sinful for him, that he did feel alone, or question, there must be somebody out there, but he let God's grace be sufficient for him and didn't go and do what was against his conscience. I mean, that's the sign of a saint there, somebody who's doing what he knows to be true and letting God fill in that, even though he is alone, and there has to be a need to fill that. So that's
Yeah, it's doing it. I think that's why it was really wise of Kreutzberg, the priest who came to him and wrote this, to really discern that and make sure that Reinisch had discerned it also, that he wasn't doing, that his motives were pure, was really the thing. And they were putting so much pressure on him. The priest, the chaplain, the prison chaplain before Kreutzberg came, would refused him the Eucharist, like, because of that. They were saying, why are you doing this? And trying to gaslight him into that he's the crazy one. You're just doing this for attention, for whatever. It was all the way to the moment of death. And I'll save that. It's very graphic and unbelievably terrifying, the way that how everything led up to the night leading up to his death. I mean, it's crazy. When you read it, it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. And that he at any moment he could have stopped it. Any moment. It's totally clear that at any moment he could have changed his mind. They wanted him to. They didn't. They wanted him to change his mind and join them, because he was exposing them. And I think it's really one other thing that Kreutzberg wrote here in the beginning. He said, our age, an age which lacks truly great men, an age which displays precious little holiness, and by constantly foretelling of an apocalypse suppresses everything good. Our age needs memory of heroes and saints whose example can lead to salvation, whose testimony points upwards like a compass to heaven. And that alone like caught me as I was going through this, saying rather than, I mean, maybe there will be a time for me to write some kind of article like I was thinking of doing, but I just thought it was a brilliant idea, and I sort of wanted to like put in context and make the reader feel guilty for enjoying their old Kelly Grant classic movies or whatever. So there's always like this, maybe a selfishness in myself wanting to write it, to show, look how I'm using these two people to contrast and make you feel guilty or some kind of perspective on it. But with this, this idea, we need memories of heroes and saints. That's what Father Kreutzberg did, is wanted to make this memory known for other people to read this and to be comforted by it. It's out of print in Germany. You can find it online, as I said, but I think maybe we can breathe some life into it by putting this English translation and letting a huge amount of readers have access to reading and getting to know him.
This is another one of those treasures that I'm looking forward to reading this when you've got this done, Jordan. But as Msgr Shea was talking about, we tend to focus oftentimes on all the bad things. I mean, a lot of bad things in the last 100 years, in our country and in our church and in our world. But the gratitude that we ought to feel toward God for giving us these beautiful saints, again, whose stories all of them that we've had, and it's a good way to start the week for me.
I do think that everyone, I think the world is getting worse in some ways and better in some ways. And I grew up thinking it was only getting worse towards apocalypse, because I was an evangelical Protestant, thinking that the rapture was coming. Now I think there's a lot of hope for the future. And and we have agency over it. We don't have to just sit and let things happen. And it's not politics. For me at least, I would never get involved in politics at all. I think the only way, the real way to make the difference is personal piety. It's everyone asking themselves, what should I do? What can I do? And accepting what God calls you to do. And it's very hard. It's very hard to do that. But I think with models like Reinish and others who are out there, and new ones, new to be discovered, new to be, I mean, it's Hildegard, who my wife really likes, Hildegard von Bingen. She was told to write. She wasn't going to write. People are amazed by her for the wrong reasons, because they're like, wow, a woman was writing in Latin at that time. That's amazing. And not at what she had to say. And she's becoming more and more known, and recently became a doctor of the church as well. So we have a mission, and it's not just to be our own individual selves, but to plug in with these kind of models and learn from them how they did it. One of the things I thought was fascinating, and I want to see more about it as I'm translating, is Reinish really distinguished that Nazism, he was incompatible with Christianity completely, because it was a reassertion of paganism. And I totally agree. It was neo-pagan. I totally agree that that's what the rise of Nazism, what they tried to do was bring back the old gods, and to say we can make victims, we can have hosties enemies, we can dehumanize and kill people that aren't in line with us. And they try to reestablish those old pagan isolated communities. That was the whole goal of it, was to say we, the Aryans, or whatever, however broad they were making it, we are the people, everyone else is not us. And Reinish recognized the changing of the times, or the times of change, or whatever. He saw that that's what was happening. But since that failed, my intuition is that Satan has changed his tactics and became even more of an imitator. If Nazism would have won, but it couldn't win, There was no real force behind it. But let's say it did win, then we may still be in some sort of weird neo-pagan age. But now I think we're in an age of a perversion, a supra-Christianity heresy is where we live, the West, and America and all of that. So part of what has to be done, like Msgr Shea is involved in, is recognizing the time that we're in, the new apostolic age, and what do we do? How do we do God's work in this age, not in the age of Chesterton and Belloc? That was a totally different time. It's good to read them, but they lived in a different age than we do.
Yeah. Underlying this, I've been thinking about, well, clearly in this post-Christendom age, the interesting thing is, I was thinking, we don't see new religions popping up. I mean, we can call them religions, but that actually worship a being greater than ourselves.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that, as you were saying this, it seems like that's the essential thing that we have as Christians. The advantage we have right now is that there is a desire within every man to acknowledge that power that's greater than themselves. And we know that it's an all-loving, all-powerful God who became man for us. But those people out there who are nuns, who are falling away, and they're claiming some sort of spiritualism, they're not going back to the pagan ways, like you're saying. So there's just a void. And our Lord is waiting there to fill that void. And so I think, fitting in with what Monsignor Shea is doing there, I think that is what we need to be doing, is bringing that, filling that void for these people. It's just, yeah, this is becoming clearer to me as we chat here this morning. And only 2 cups of coffee.
Excellent. That seems such a daunting prospect if it's all on us. But here we have role models like Father Reinish and others helping us see our way forward with that. And certainly the personal piety dimension is huge.
Yeah, and I guess, and it seems like it doesn't have to be a big, I mean, doesn't have to be a big weight. Hopefully for us, it seems like all we have to do is just share that there's Jesus, that we have a savior. I mean, so it's and as as Jordan was talking about, there it seems to me to not get too far out of what we can do. So like again, my favorite Stephen Covey always talks about our circle of control or circle of concern and our circle of influence.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what maybe I get the term. But oftentimes when you're out watching the politics and everything, you're way out here and you can't do anything about it. And so you spend all of your time spinning your kind of your wheels and thinking, oh, this is the government, the church, this is all horrible. It's like, well, you can't do anything about that. So stop.
I love that what you're saying right there, Stephen, about like filling the void and that there's an opportunity and all of that. You have to read. Even we were reading St. Augustine the other day in a class, and it's a part where he's praising God, the most powerful, the most secret, yet the most present, like all these contrasts that are beautiful. And then all of a sudden he switches his thought and he says, leading the proud into decay, and they don't know it. And we just read that, we think, oh, that applies to Joe Biden or Angela Merkel or whoever, leading them into decay because look how old and ugly they're getting now. But that's not what he was talking. He's talking. I do think he is referencing the centuries down to his time of witnessing the collapse of paganism right around them. They couldn't believe that. It's leading the proud, the civic religion leaders, the Roman Pontifex Maximus, all this stuff, leading them into decay. And they looked very old, and Christianity looked very new and vibrant and alive. What it is now, though, now it doesn't feel that way because we've had this long history, and but it should. I really think it should. That's why, listen to the episode with Msgr Shea, and that really is insightful as to that we have opportunities now, but they're different opportunities than they had even a couple hundred years ago. We're right at the front, and we're responsible for laying a good foundation with basic things that need to be asked and exploited right now. And that's what I'm trying to do, trying to bring a saint to knowledge here, trying to point out some distinctions between the pagan world and the Christian world, and just a few things like that. I think is a good start for myself in helping with the work that needs to be done.
I'm looking forward to reading the work when it's completed, Jordan. I sure enjoy getting to hear about it while it's in process. That's really interesting to me and helpful to students and writers, all of us.
Yeah, you can't call yourself a writer or a painter or whatever if you don't do it. Even if you have done it in the past, I would say. I love this quote by Seneca, my favorite pagan, where he says it's better to be painting than to have painted, and it's more enjoyable to be painting than to have painted. And he's using it in another context, but I love that. And I sometimes when I tell my students goodbye in a congratulations, you graduated letter or whatever, I like to add that in because I felt it myself as a student. When it was ending, I thought it was, you have to look at it as it's the beginning of something else. So you don't just stop, you start painting again with something else. And then you call yourself a painter. So if you're somebody if you're writing or whatever it is, I think it's more literally going through the process, going through the steps, sitting at your keyboard. You're not going to feel inspired every day, of course, but it doesn't matter. If you write, you go back and you read what you've written. You don't know. Stephen probably doesn't remember all those college years ago, whether or not he felt inspired while he was writing it, but it doesn't matter. You see what it is now. So that would be my encouragement for anyone who's creative is actually do it so that you can call yourself a doer of that thing.
All right. Well, that's probably a good, we'll call this some sort of a cadence. How about that? Not like the finale of the conversation. It's like the end of a movement, we'll say. Okay.
Yeah. That'd be great. I don't know. I'd love to come back on later when maybe, especially after the work is done or at least closer or something, and talk more about Rhinish or, any of those things. It would be a lot of fun, especially if you guys can read it and give thoughts out. So I'll send you both a copy when I'm done.
Thank you. And even the process, the translation process, which could be a separate, like, what's that like to translate something and put it, it's not word for word necessarily.
That would be really interesting to get into the details of, because it's different. It's different than writing, yet there's something similar. And Simone Weil, who I like a lot, said we should write the way we translate. And I don't translate a lot. My students are way better translators than me because I don't actually translate very often. So now I'm getting a glimpse of what that means by doing this translation. I mean, I've done it smaller works in the past for professors and stuff, but doing a long project like this, it's making me think, then what does that mean? We should write like we translate. So you have ideas and you're just putting them down and trying to keep yourself out of it in a way. And I think that's great.
Okay, well, thanks for starting the week with me. It's been great having coffee and conversation with you guys here at the start of the week.
Thank you. It's been awesome.
Subscribe to the Kolbecast on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss an episode. And let us know how we're doing by leaving a rating or a review. And as always, feel free to email us at podcast@kolbe.org.
Mary our Mother, pray for us. St. Maximilian Kolbe, pray for us. Ad Majorem Dei Gloriam.